Rising from the shores of Lake Wakatipu in far-flung Queenstown, New Zealand, are the breathtaking mountains known as the Remarkables. Residing in their foothills, fine artist Ivan Clark has used the striking natural beauty of his surroundings as inspiration for over 30 years. Four years ago, Ivan had a compulsion to paint a subject even closer to home, his dog Arthur, an old dachshund. This single painting was hung in the Ivan Clark Gallery and aroused such curiosity amongst locals and international tourists that it prompted the creation of Lonely Dog in the fantastical port town of Alvaridge. Teaming up with Weta Workshop, Ivan has further developed a range of stunning 3D characters and sculptures, ready to embark on the next phase of the journey. A journey that will take this original and much-loved story to the world in the form of a 3D feature animation.
Hi, I'm Owen Edgerton.
I'm Chris Moss.
And I'm Russell Sharman.
I'm excited to tell you about the story of Lonely Dog.
As you have can see, it's pretty amazing, this whole project, and this is before we even got involved. So we just want to give props to Ivan and Stu for all they've created and how blessed we feel to be a part of this. You know, of all the things we've taken on over the years, this is one of the freshest, unique, and it's a project that really tackles some heady stuff. So I want to tell you a little bit about the world. These guys will run through the story and the characters, but just for a point of reference, the basic story is, this is Lonely Dog, and it's about him, this orphan, who kind of is raised in a cat world and uses his music to bring these two worlds together. So picture, if you will, if Baz Luhrmann made this kick-ass rendition of Great Expectations, this musical.
Yeah.
But it's not what it looks like. It's not about cats and dogs. It is about race and class and old versus new and us versus them. Essentially these age-old conflicts, and it's something that will speak to this global audience, because I don't know of a country that doesn't struggle with some of those things. Because at its essence, it is the human experience. And we know kids are going to love it because, well, one, it's about cats and dogs. But it is this fun, funny, whimsical world filled with music and just vivid detail, rich history, and gorgeous. So Alvaridgea, as you've seen, is this island country, grand, scenic, very New Zealand inspired. It has like the snow-capped Shipwood Mountains, these sunny Esperos seaports, and it's this history, though, in this country that's scarred by the differences between the cats and dogs who populate it. And after a recent power grab, the last half century or so has been about the cats being in power and enjoying the high life, and the dogs have ended up working hard to provide this life for their counterparts. Kind of this subservient second-class life, and they're too busy scratching out, you know, just existence to think about much else. And this racial and class chasm is most seen in kind of the main setting of our story, Port Elveridge. It's the only place in all of Alvaridgea where dogs and cats live side by side, and they're separated by the Juke River that runs through the middle of town. And it's peaceful. The last 50 years have been peaceful, but there's a steady undercurrent of tension and some palpable disdain, and you'll realize that change is coming.
This is Lonely Dog. He's our hero. Arthur's his name, but he comes to be known as Lonely Dog. You can see he's a little smaller than the other hounds, a little shy of eye. He's an orphan and an outsider, but he's going to find his voice in music. His journey is going to take him from being an orphan outsider to a traveling musician to eventually being the centerpiece of a musical revolution. He is an orphan, and so he's without a home. And in that way, he's always searching for where his home might be. Maybe it's in the slums of Houndside with the blues music, or the high-ranking Catside with the fast jazz, or maybe the rock and roll of the mountains and the juke hounds. He's going to move through all these different cultures and more, and find a way to incorporate all these different styles into his own style and become a bridge that bridges these cultural chasms.
So we'll start high above Alvergia. A narrator will set up the world. We've got some myth making to do as we explore this new world and zero in on this rough and tumble Port Alverge. And in specific, we'll zero in on this cannery that employs most of the hounds in town, where we have a labor strike. We have hound worker against cat management. And the leader of this rabble of hounds is Van Trong.
Van Trong is a Woody Guthrie, Bob Dylan type folk activist. I mean, you can see him standing in front of a crowd of striking hounds with songs that he's penned that really rise them up to stand up for justice and stand up for their rights. And he is standing up against the owner of the cannery, the cat Ruddigan. And Ruddigan is our villain. Sharp-dressed, brandy-sipping, kelp cigar-smoking, wealthy and powerful. He's the mayor of the town, and he is willing to do nearly anything to keep the hounds in their place and keep himself in a position of power.
Now, Ruddigan would rather burn down his cannery than give in to the hounds. And in fact, he does just that. He locks the hounds inside the cannery and sets it ablaze, silencing Van Trong forever. So right up front, we set up that the stakes are high in this story. But that same night, there's hope. A little puppy is left on the steps of an orphanage. And this is our hero, Little Arthur, who will come to be known as Lonely Dog. Now, we will see Lonely Dog grow into a pup, and we'll move relatively quickly through this part of his life. But there are a few hounds that we should tell you about so you get a sense of them as they move throughout the story.
So there are three of the other hounds that Lonely Dog grows up with. One is Marvin. Marvin's the bully, and he's going to beat up on Little Lonely Dog when they're kids, and later on when they're fully grown. Then there's Bronson. Bronson's a towering hound with a heart of gold, teeth of steel. He becomes Lonely Dog's best friend. He's probably got more brawn than brains. We actually are picturing him being voiced by like Jack Black. Jack Black, like an Anchorman, where he plays the motorcycle fella. In fact, he's actually going to grow up to become part of the Howlers, a motorcycle gang. And then there's Kelsey. Kelsey is another orphan at the orphanage and is Lonely Dog's love interest. She's got a girl next door kind of spirit about her, but she's an orphan. She's got street smarts and she's tough. She's going to represent to Lonely Dog the call to remain true to your roots, to keep close to where you've come from.
Now, by page 10, Lonely Dog will discover the music room at the orphanage, and in particular, a guitar. He'll be blown away by the sounds that he can make on this instrument, and he'll also discover these old albums with photos of old musicians, and most importantly, an image of Van Trong, who has now become a kind of folk hero for the hounds. Now, as Lonely Dog grows older, he starts to develop his own style. He starts to act different and starts to dress different. You know, the zoot suit and wingtips when he's a little puppy, which does not go well with the other orphans. But it doesn't matter. He spends most of his time alone anyway, practicing his music. Now, one hound takes notice of Lonely Dog, and that's the headmaster of the orphanage, Rolf.
Rolf is the closest thing that Lonely Dog has to a father. He's an older hound, he's highly educated, and he's haunted. He's got some secrets inside of him. You can think of him, a character with gravitas, maybe voiced by like James Earl Jones or Anthony Hopkins. And he finds his only release in the traditional music of the hounds, blues. This could be another kind of music, but it's a music that's rich with emotion and full of mourning.
Rolf introduces Lonely Dog to Revelers Green. Now, Revelers Green is this crazy place in Houndside where musicians and performers gather every night to just jam and juggle and do magic, and it's just this great festive place. And here, Lonely Dog meets some of the old-timers and who play the blues with Rolf, but he also gets his first taste of cat culture with these crazy jazz cats that have crossed the river to play in Revelers Green, because all they care about is the music. And in fact, they invite Lonely Dog, hey, you should come hear us play sometime in Catside. Now, Lonely Dog at this point All he knows about cats is that they're the enemy. And Cat's Eye is no place for hounds unless you want to wash dishes, so, thanks very much, but that's not going to happen. Now, around this time, we learned that Rolf has a dark secret. It turns out that the fat cat, Ruddigan, who owned the rebuilt cannery now, is also the mayor of the port, has been using Rolf as a spy in Houndside. Now, the only reason Rolf is doing it is to protect the orphanage, because Ruddigan could shut it down at any time. But something that Lonely Dog said back at Revelers Green when he was talking about being bullied, about courage and taking a stand, inspires Rolf, and he does just that in front of Ruddigan and says, "I'm not playing along anymore." Now, all this is forgotten when a blue moon rises over Alvergia. Now, this only happens once every 10 years in this land, and when it does, all of the hounds head for Marmalade Mountain and this big open-air arena where they have a kind of 3-4 day music festival. Lonely Dog is beside himself. He's so excited. Rolf's been talking about it for years, and he sends Lonely Dog to get his guitar in an old shed. Now, Marvin, the bully, sees his opportunity and locks Lonely Dog in the shed. In the hustle and bustle of getting all the pups onto the buses from Marmalade Mountain, he's left behind. Now, for 2 days, he sulks in this shed, thinking surely someone will remember and come back for me. Bronson or Kelsey or Rolf, surely. No one does. No one comes back. Now, what he can't know is that in the crush of hounds getting to Marmalade Mountain, once they realized he was missing, which of course they did, there was no way to turn back. But for Lonely Dog, he's been forgotten. Marvin was right. No one cares about him. Even his few friends have abandoned him. And now about that time, the cats show up to shutter the orphanage. Ruddigan's making good on his threat. So Lonely Dog seizes his chance and runs away. By the time Rolf gets back and sees that the orphanage is shut down, which is bad enough, Lonely Dog is long gone. Now, Lonely Dog, feeling rejected and abandoned, figures that all he's got is his music. And the only other animal that he's crossed paths with that cares much about music are those jazz cats. So desperate and alone, for the first time in his life, he crosses the Juke River to Catside to see if his music can find himself a home. Act 2 opens with Lonely Dog stepping into Catside. It's a revelation. A completely different style of music in an entirely new context. If Houndside's all salty dogs listening to the blues, Catside is all refined felines quietly listening to classical. But the subversive youth are all about the jazz. So Lonely Dog finds those jazz cats in their club and is just mesmerized by their music. He gets a job bussing tables just to be close to them. And in fact, when they find out that he has no place to go, they invite him to come live with them in the apartment above the club. Now, this blows Lonely Dog's mind. I mean, cats are the enemy, right? And yet these guys are being so nice to him. He agrees because he doesn't have any place to go. So the first half of Act 2 is all about Lonely Dog learning a new form of music and really a new way of life in Catside. And we think this jazz quartet of cats could be a ton of fun. They're irreverent, quick with a joke, they've got crazy names like Limerick and Gregorian. And Lonely Dog starts to write new songs and starts to find a new sound. In fact, fashions his own instrument, which is this crazy blend of a violin and a guitar, finding a whole new sound. Now, one night, this amazing, stunning cat comes strutting into the club. And this is Celia.
Celia is the embodiment of the young cats and the jazz movement. She is seductive, she's got style, she's like Beyonce channeling Billie Holiday. She's wealthy, she's got an incredible singing voice. In fact, she's often invited onto stage to sing along with whoever's jamming that night. And she is going to represent to Lonely Dog the desire to break any rule, to try anything new. So if Kelsey represents staying true to your roots, then Celia represents going out and exploring the new world, and Lonely Dog is going to kind of find his own path between the two of both honoring the tradition you're from and being open to new experiences.
Now, of course, the cats invite Celia up to sing with them. They always do. But Gregorian, in his excitement, has snapped the neck of his guitar. Lonely Dog, who's got his new instrument, bounds up on stage, willing to sit in and help his friends. And suddenly the crowd just goes quiet. Hound on a cat stage. And Lonely Dog immediately regrets his decision, but Celia, she's got the crowd in the palm of her hand and says, hey, let's give the kid a chance. So he starts to play, and in fact, it's the first time he's played for an audience. Blows the room away. And for the first time, he is using his music to connect with others. And even though it's a room full of cats, it's the most exhilarating experience of his life. Celia sees this kindred spirit with little Arthur, with Lonely Dog, and there's an instant spark between them. Now, Lonely Dog becomes a kind of regular fixture on the stage after this, and his reputation starts to spread, much to the horror of the upper-class cats, and him and Celia start to spend a lot more time together. Now, he's not forgotten his friends back at the orphanage, but that wound of abandonment is still pretty deep. But he's heard through the grapevine that Kelsey's grown into a pretty young pup, and that Bronson, since they shut down the orphanage, has actually joined the Howlers motorcycle gang. Well, he hasn't heard much about Rolf, which is perhaps the saddest for him, because he was like a father figure. It turns out Rolf has actually moved up the coast to this old hound fortress. This is back from the old hound wars, and his war buddy, the Baron of Beaconsfield.
The Baron is this blustery old war veteran. You can think of him being voiced by like Jim Carrey or John Cleese. He's filled with misremembered histories and all these tall tales of the past. And he's largely a comical character, but he's also, of all the characters, the most loyal to the cause of hound pride. In the fort that Russell was explaining, he actually has a broadcast system, and he's filling the airways with rants against the cats and promises that the hounds will rise again.
Now, around this same time, we learn that Celia is actually the granddaughter of Ruddigan. The worst person Lonely Dog could be hanging out with. He's heard she's taken up with a hound, but she's got him wrapped around her little finger, so for now, all's well. Now, Kelsey, the cute little pup from the orphanage, she has not forgotten Lonely Dog, and she's seen the posters, and one night, curiosity gets the better of her, and she goes to hear him play in Cat's Eye. She hits the club and, of course, sticks out like a sore hound, but she sees Lonely Dog up there on the stage. She sees him playing for cats, with cats, but worse, she sees the spark between Lonely Dog and Celia, and she's heartbroken. There's a scuffle at this point because the cats have noticed a hound in the club, and Lonely Dog sees it in the back of the club and comes to her defense, but instead of thanking him, she actually sort of puts it to him, you've sold out your hound roots to throw in with the cats. And he tries to say, look, the cats aren't so bad. But what she says kind of hits home because, he feels as though he was rejected by the hounds, but he knows he'll never really be accepted by the cats, and he starts to wonder maybe he has sold out his hound roots. He knows he's got a gift and a calling like Van Trong to use his music, but he's starting to wonder if he'll ever feel at home anywhere. So at our midpoint, Lonely Dog's time in Catside will come to a close. He's rehearsing one night with Celia in the club alone, and Ruddigan comes busting in, catches them. Now, there's a sort of an argument, all hell breaks loose, and when Ruddigan learns that Lonely Dog was actually an orphan in Rolf's orphanage, he uses the most deadly weapon he has, which is the truth, and that Rolf was a spy in Houndside. Well, Lonely Dog just reels from this. Can't believe it's true. There's a scuffle, a gun, and Ruddigan is wounded. But it's Celia that's holding the gun. She was willing to pull the trigger on her own grandfather to protect Lonely Dog. But she knows Ruddigan's going to pin it on Lonely Dog, so she tells him, you got to get out of town. Which he does, but there's only one place he knows to go, and that's Revelers Green. And crossing that Juke River back to Houndside is probably the hardest thing he's had to do yet. He doesn't know if they're going to remember him. He doesn't know if Bronson's even going to accept him. But he heads to Revelers Green, and he finds Bronson, who is now actually the leader of the Howlers motorcycle gang. And not only does his old friend remember him, he welcomes him back with open arms. And of course, he'll help his old friend Lonely Dog. And he takes him up into the Shipwood Mountains, into hiding among the Juke Hounds. So the second half of Act 2 is all about Lonely Dog reconnecting with his hound roots. Bronson actually takes him up to live with an uncle in the Shipwood Mountains. Now, the uncle is a Juke Hound. The Juke Hounds are old school mountain hounds. They're miners and prospectors removed from the petty hound and cat politics, and we think these guys could be hilarious. Always quick with a joke, always laughing. They make their own moonshine, and they've got their own style of music, which is good old-fashioned, hard-driving rock and roll. And for the first time in a long time, maybe ever, Lonely Dog actually feels at home and starts to recuperate a little bit of that hound soul. Meanwhile, back in the port, Ruddigan sure enough, is out for blood. And he's actually gathered a team of tomcats who's going to go out and look for Lonely Dog. And among them is Marvin, that old bully from the orphanage, who has agreed to track Lonely Dog for a price. We also learn that Bronson's actually been arrested for helping Lonely Dog and been thrown into this prison barge just up the river from the port. But Lonely Dog doesn't know this. He's again starting to finally feel connected and part of a community, these hounds, these juke hounds up in the mountains. And his reputation as a musician begins to spread, so much so that he gets a visit from the kind of spiritual leader of the juke hounds, a hound named Jeroboam.
Jeroboam is a half preacher, half rocker. You can think of him like a rocking activist, like John Lennon or Bono, just willing to pour out his heart, whether it's to one person or a group of people, and inspire them to really live and show their passion.
Now Jeroboam tells Lonely Dog, you've got a gift and a responsibility to use it. He lets them know that the cats are bearing down hard and the hounds need a hero to believe it. But for Lonely Dog, he just doesn't buy it. He resists the idea. First of all, he finally feels at home somewhere. But second, he doesn't have a problem with the cats. Why do they have to continue to pursue this division? And Jeroboam surprises him by agreeing and says, what I'm looking for is a voice and a sound that will unite us all. So Lonely Dog's got a tough choice, choosing between a calling and his own happiness. And of course he makes the right decision. He follows Jeroboam to Muller's Post. After all, it's what Van Trong would have done. And in Muller's Post, which is this amazing city carved out of a mountain, the cathedral to rock and roll, he amplifies his instrument for the first time. They plug it into a broadcasting station. And he begins to play his music, which is now this radical blend of blues and jazz and juke hound rock and roll to the masses. And it's a strange experience for Lonely Dog because on the one hand he's alone, playing to a microphone, but he's also connecting with more hounds than he's ever connected with before. Now, Ruddigan hears about this because everyone hears about it, and sure enough, the Tomcats can pinpoint him to Muller's Post, and they attack. There's a big showdown between Marvin and Lonely Dog, rehashing some of those old conflicts, but Jeroboam intervenes. And you know, Jeroboam's kind of half preacher, half rock and roller, and he starts to actually talk sense into Marvin, maybe even turning him when the Tomcats crash in and kill Jeroboam. Lonely Dog's arrested, he's thrown into the same prison barge with Bronson, and Ruddigan sets in motion a plan to actually burn down the barge with the prisoners locked inside, sort of a page from his own history. So Lonely Dog's given up the place he called home to follow his calling and has failed miserably. All hope is lost. So Act 3 will be all about Lonely Dog rising up and helping the hounds rise up against the tyranny of the cats. And he starts with the prison barge. At first he thinks, well, I tried to be a hero and I failed. But he remembers the advice he gave Rolf, which was about courage and taking a stand. He also remembers the music of Van Trong, and he leads the prisoners in a riot that overcomes the guards, and they unmoor the prison barge and set sail up the coast to the Baron's fortress, which they know has a broadcasting station. They don't know Rolf is there yet. Now, meanwhile, back in the port, Celia has learned from Ruddigan that the cats above him have lost patience with his rule. They think he's not done enough to control the hounds, and they're sending a cat army to silence the hounds once and for all. She breaks away and goes to the only hound she can think of, Kelsey, to see if she can warn the hounds of what's coming. And sure enough, Kelsey takes her up the coast to the Baron's fortress as well. Now they all converge at the fortress, and Kelsey and Lonely Dog see each other again for the first time. And now Lonely Dog knows who he is, and Kelsey can see that, and it's clear they're meant to be together. Celia, of course, bows out gracefully after warning them that this cat army's massing. And Lonely Dog's not sure what to do. He doesn't want to lead the hounds into a trap. But that's when he sees Rolf again for the first time. It's a bittersweet reunion because he still feels abandoned by him, and he's got these accusations rattling around in his head from Ruddigan. The first thing Rolf does is confirm those accusations. Yes, I was a spy for Houndside, but I was only doing it to protect the orphanage, and more importantly, I was protecting you. And this is where we have a big reveal where we learn that Van Trong, who died in that fire in the cannery, was actually Lonely Dog's father. And Rolf was his grandfather. And he's the one that left him on the steps of the orphanage. So he is destined to lead the hounds. He is the direct descendant of Van Trong. And just then, The moon rises over Alfregia, the blue moon, and Lonely Dog knows what he must do. He gets on the radio and says, "I'm heading to Marmalade Mountain, and I hope you all join me." So there's a mad dash to Marmalade Mountain in this big mountain arena. The cat army's massing, and by the time they get there, it looks like it will be a massacre. Ruddigan, of course, is having the last laugh, and Lonely Dog feels that perhaps he's failed again when thousands of young cats come pouring into that mountain arena. But they're not there to attack. They've actually been listening to the broadcast and have fallen in love with Lonely Dog's music. Now, the cat army's not going to fire on their own kind, and Ruddigan, in frustration, turns a gun on Lonely Dog himself. Rolf lays him out with one punch, and there's a great moment of reconciliation there between Rolf and Lonely Dog. And Celia pulls Lonely Dog up on the stage, and he looks out at this crowd. And he realizes that all those hours spent in the studio playing his music, and he was connecting to thousands of hounds and cats, and they were loving him for it. There was this overwhelming rush of acceptance and love for Lonely Dog, and as he and Celia begin to sing and begin to play, and they bring Kelsey up on the stage as well, Lonely Dog realizes that he never has to be lonely again.